Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Author to Author podcast. I am your host, Pamela R Haynes, award-winning author of 2 books called Loving the Brothers and Loving the Sisters. I interview independently published and traditionally published authors from around the globe. The Author to Author podcast is available on 20 plus streaming platforms and on 6 radio stations, namely East London Radio Mixcloud, Pam Tango Radio, UK246.com, Chalk Hill Community Radio, LWR Radio, and the Sounds of My Life radio station. The podcast is sponsored by Dalgety Herbal Teas. Use the discount code A2AS6 for 10% off your next Dalgety tea order. In this week's episode, I caught up with talented author Dorothy Koomson. Let's jump into her interview now. See you on the other side. Hello there, Dorothy. Good evening, and how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to have you on the Author to Author podcast this evening. And where to start? I don't think that 40 minutes is long enough, but we're going to have a good try. In terms of where you live now and where you've lived in the past and your heritage, do you want to explain that to my listeners and tell us who you are and what you're about?
It's going to take you ages. There's so many years to talk about. I'm Dorothy Koomson. I'm a writer. I used to be a journalist. I still am a journalist in my heart. I haven't done much journalism for a while. I've written 19 books. I'm in the process of writing my next book, and I've been published for 20 years. It's 20 years in 2023, so 20 years of being published, and I had a long journey to getting published. It wasn't easy, so every second is actually, it feels like it's hard won and well loved. I've lived in London. I grew up in London. I went to college in Leeds, and then I did my master's in London again. And then I worked for many years, and then I moved to Australia for 2 years, and then I came back to England and I moved to Brighton, which is where I live now.
Thank you for that. And in terms of your heritage, where do your family come from?
My parents are from Ghana in West Africa.
Right. Have you had the opportunity to go to Ghana?
When I was very little, I went. Yeah, I haven't been since. I keep planning to go, and then pandemic, and then this, and then that. And so I haven't managed to go recently, no.
How long did you say you lived in Brighton for?
Well, I've lived here now. I came back to England in 2007. So I've lived here for
16 years.
16 years. 16 years.
I mean, I've only known that because my son was born in 2007, so I should know that. Yeah. Okay. So you've lived in Brighton, and one of the first observations that I noticed, I have to say that I'm a new fan, so I haven't been following you from the beginning. I got into your books through Angie Greaves. You did an interview with her on Instagram, and I thought, well, who is this woman? Now I found her. I've got to find out everything about her. So I've had a good stab at reading some of your books. And one of the first things that I noticed is that your books are based in and around Brighton. Why was that?
Well, actually, my earlier books, my first 3 or 4 books are actually based in Leeds. And I based them there because, I grew up in London, but a lot of the books that I used to read and now write were all just based in London. And they all acted as though London was the centre of the universe. And, you can't talk nonsense to me about London. I love London. It's my birthplace and I love it. But it's not the centre of the universe, particularly central London. So I decided, I made a conscious decision to set my books outside of London because the UK is a very big place, and I just wanted to set my stories in somewhere where I knew. So I set them in Leeds. And then, like I say, I went to Australia and I wrote my 4th book there, which is Marshmallows for Breakfast. And so that's partially set in Australia. And then I came back and I moved to Brighton. So I just started setting it in Brighton where I live. So I think when you live somewhere, you can give it a bit more authenticity when you're writing about it because you know the place and you know what's going on. So I decided to set my books down here, and it's a great place, and you have the sea and you have a city. Yeah, so that's why most of my books are set here because I live here now.
Yes, I mean, obviously, you talk about Brighton Pier and you talk about the Pavilion and quite a few places in and around Brighton. But let's go back a bit. You said you were in journalism. Why did you move into writing, or what inspired you to move into writing?
Oh, I've always been a writer. I've always been a fiction writer. When I was little, I used to write books. I used to write stories. I used to write a chapter every night and then pass it around my school friends the next morning because I wanted them to be involved in this story of this story that was set in America. I'd never been to America, and all these great things happened. I love drama, so I've been writing since I was very young. I always wanted to be a journalist, a magazine journalist, which is what I became. And so I worked on magazines for many years. And whilst I was working on the magazines, I was still writing my short stories and still trying to write a novel. I carried on with that. So I'd go, my day job, pay for my mortgage and pay for my rent and pay my bills, or just about, because I was paid very little thinking back now. And then I was writing in the evenings and weekends constantly on the train to work. I would be writing my stories, and the train home, in front of the television. And I eventually got published. And we all have this dream that when you get published, that's it, you're giving up the day job and you're lying around on a chaise lounge eating grapes and dictating your books. And obviously it just never works out that way. So I had to carry on working. And then I moved to Australia and I had a job over there as well. So I was working and writing, and the books were doing really well. They started doing amazing well. It was still really difficult. I still had to work full time. And then I got made redundant from that job. So I had a choice of whether to get a job in Australia or to come back to England. So I came back to England and I thought, you know what, I'll flip my career on its head. I'll freelance and I'll write books. And I'll freelance to basically make as much money as I could to survive. But I didn't want to live like back in London. I wanted to try something new. I wanted to go somewhere else because it would have felt like I'd just gone away for 2 years and nothing had changed really. So I came down here and I rented the place, and I just thought I was just freelancing a bit, but I was writing my books. And then I found out, because the third book particularly had sold so well, I could afford to become a full-time novelist. So that's when I became a full-time novelist. But I still, every now and then, I still have to write an article or two to keep going, and also to keep my hand in. I do like writing. I do like being a journalist. I did like it. I like particularly being an editor because I was an editor mainly. So I used to write the headlines and cut the document to fit the page, which was my favorite part of writing as well. I love making up the story, but I also love when I have to edit and cut it all down.
You're the first person I've interviewed that actually likes editing.
Oh, see, I
Oh,
love
no, that
it.
part of it. Oh dear. Okay, so different strokes for different folks, really. So you were doing the editing alongside writing your books. I'm trying to remember the books I have read of yours so far, but where does your inspiration in terms of storylines, plots, drama? Are you someone that has to plan it all out each chapter as you go along, or are you someone that does a little bit here, jumps to maybe chapter 19 there? How does your brain process your stories?
I don't plan, not really planning. Over there, I've got a whiteboard, which is where I stick my post-it notes with what's happening in the story. But I'm not generally a planner, and I don't generally write the story in one go. I start whatever scenes are in my head, I start there and I write them down. I'll keep going with that. I'll be doing my research at the same time, talking to people and finding out the bits of the story that I don't know, that I don't understand, or that I don't have any clue about. And I'll keep doing that until I get to the end. And then I'll get my trusty post-it notes and my stickies and my Sharpie, and I'll write down all the different things that have happened in the story. And I'll use different coloured stickies for different characters so that I can just look at the board and see who has got too much story, who hasn't got enough story. And then I'll sort of like scrabble it around on the board to see which scenes I've written, which needs to move there and there. Then I'll rewrite the whole thing in one, so it's coherent and it works. And then I always overwrite, so I write far too much. So I'll then go back and I'll just ruthlessly cut out everything that isn't moving the story on. Even the best bits, I would just go, it has to go. And that's what I love about editing, you're making your story better. So the first draft doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to get the story down. And then you go back and rewrite and then edit to make it as good a story as you can.
Do you have like a group of other writers or reviewers or people who you bounce your ideas off of? Who acts as your muse?
I actually don't have a writing circle. I do suggest to people who want to write, if they feel like they need support, they should start a writing group of people who are supportive and who they can be supportive to as well. But I don't have that. I know lots of other writers do. If I've got an issue with my book or if I have an idea, I'll talk to my editor, I'll talk to my agent. Rarely I'll talk to my husband about it. I talk to my husband all the time. I don't not talk to my husband, but I'll talk to my editor or my agent and explain to them what the story is. And they'll either go, oh yeah, that's great, or I'm not sure. And then I'll have to decide whether I can sustain that book. In my head, I'll have an idea of what I'm going to write. And if I've got to 5, what if this happens, and then what if this happens, and I realize I can sustain a book from it, I will keep going. But I don't have people most people don't read my books as they're going along. Sometimes I will say to my husband, can you read this? Because I think I've forgotten how to write. So can you just double check that I haven't? And he'll read it and you go, oh, that's fine. Or he'll go, I don't understand this. But mostly I just get on with it. And when I've finished, I get the feedback I need from my editor and my agent.
I mean, your stories are fantastic. They do keep you gripped, and they are page turners as well. But one thing I do like about your characters is that you fall in love with them, and then you notice something about them that you think, oh, right, actually, that particular character is a black woman. I didn't realize that from reading maybe the first couple of chapters. Was that by design, or was it? It's very, very subtle that we have references to maybe somebody's ethnicity, or they've got C4 hair, or they are brown skin, black skin. Was that by design, or was it just as you were writing?
The thing is, with writing, particularly commercial books, I mean, a lot of people don't expect black women to write commercial books. We're supposed to write the books that are going to be on the book long list. And, I'm not dissing any type of genre. You want to go with your heart, go with God, with whatever genre you want to write. But I'm not a literary person. I like reading them, but that's not my thing to write. But in a lot of commercial popular fiction books, there'll be this long description of a white character, and then they'll be like, and a black woman, or a black person, or a black man. And I'd be like, this was all the books I used to read. And I'd be like, okay, so we're all just like this big lump. But when I started writing, I decided to make my character, obviously my characters are going to be, the main character is always going to be a black woman. And sometimes there are white women, they're mainly black women. They're always black women. And I wanted to write black women as the main character, the central character, the love interest, or the kooky person, not the oversexed antagonist or the sidekick or the best friend or whatever. I wanted them to always be the central character. And sometimes I'll describe them in great detail and sometimes I won't. But what I won't do is the reason I'm saying put clues in, when I was first trying to get published and I had a meeting with an agent and she was saying that it wasn't obvious that the main character was a black woman. And so she said, I should put clues into the story so that people would know it was a black woman. And I was like, okay, not really my thing. I'm not going to be doing that. Especially because, I don't pick up the phone and go, oh, hello, I'm black. It's just weird, just a weird thing to think that I'm going to do. So yeah, I don't put clues in. I don't explain things either. I don't need to. Things like wearing a scarf to sleep in. I don't go into a big long detail about it because I just assume that the person who is reading it will know. And if they don't know, I assume they're intelligent enough to go and find out. They don't need me to be telling them this, this, and this. Just like when they read the book that's set on the moon, they don't need me to they don't need the author to go into big detail about this, this, and that, or eating haggis, or I don't know. It's not a conscious decision of like, oh, I am going to do this. I don't consciously put any clues in inverted commas into my books in the same way that other people don't have to. Other people don't have to, you know, they just write their books, and that's what I do. And that's what I encourage people to do. Just write your books. Don't feel you have to put explanations in or to make people understand something. Well, you know, if you don't understand, fair enough, go and find out. Don't expect an author to teach you, a Black author or an author of color to teach you something. You know, that's not, I just want to tell a story. And that's what I think all authors should be allowed to do. You don't need to teach people things just because somebody who picks up your book might not be from the same world as you are.
I mean, it's wonderful to hear you say that because it's hard enough being a Black woman who is a writer, much less with the additional responsibility to have to explain every single thing that you do. It's not our responsibility as fiction writers to do that. You know, I'm a English language student and English literature at A level, and whenever I never didn't understand what Chaucer or Shakespeare had, you know, I had to go and look it up and do a deep dive into finding out exactly what it was that they were talking about. So I'm glad that you don't feel that you have a responsibility to do all of them, you know, to do all of that and explain every single detail to the reader. What else I've learned about you is that I've listened to your podcast on YouTube. Is it The Happy Author?
You're happy
Got
author,
that
yes.
right? Yeah. I've definitely listened to the one where you interviewed your agent. Tell me how you found him, how long have you worked together, and how easy or difficult has it been to get your next book deal?
Well, it's a long time. It's been a long time, 20 years since my first book was published. So my first book, I wrote it and I sent the first 3 chapters off, and I just got rejected by every single person in the writer and artist yearbook and the writer's handbook. And then I finished it, and then I sent it off again. I just got roundly rejected all over again. So twice people rejected me. And well, seriously, Koomson, just leave us alone. So I sent it to a publisher because I just thought I had nothing to lose. So I sent it to a publisher, and like 3 months later, I got a letter offering me a 2-book deal. So, and I'm truncating the story. I rang up one of the agents who hadn't been too awful to me, and in their rejections. And I rang up 2 of them, and one of them I went to meet, and she's the one who said about putting clues into my book. And I was like, yeah. She had said in her letter that I was trying too hard to be funny. So I rang her up and just had a chat with her, and she kept laughing. And I said to her, "See, I am funny." And she said, "Okay, do you want me to be your agent?" So she was my agent for the first 2 books. And then I decided, so those 2 books were romantic comedies, essentially, The Cupid Effect and The Chocolate Run. And then I decided I wanted to write a different type of book, My Best Friend's Girl. And for me, it's the story that informs what I do. I don't write the same story over and over again. I just don't. And my publishers weren't that keen on me changing. And so I said to my agent at the time, I want to move on. I want to see it. Also, I want to see if I can get more money. You know, I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I wanted to get more money because I wanted to live the dream of, like, you know, being a full-time writer. She wasn't that keen on it either. So I thought, you know what, I need to try something else. I need to move on. And it's only in the past few years that my friends all said to me, "We thought you were mad. You spent so long trying to get an agent and getting all these rejections, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm moving on, da, 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 like it's nothing." When I decided to split from her, I just sent out letters to agents. And my current agent was one of the people, he was actually on holiday. His colleague rang me up and said, "Oh, my colleague is on holiday. would you mind waiting for him to come back? And I was like, yeah, fine. I've got nothing to lose. No one else is interested. So he came back from holiday and we met up in London. And he had worked with J.G. Ballard, who was one of my favorite writers. So I was really fascinated, like, that this person, and he does sci-fi stuff, and I'm a big sci-fi fan. So we met up in London and we talked, and we just got on really well. And I'd sent him the first chunk of My Best Friend's Girl. I hadn't finished it. So he said, do you want me to be your agent? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? No one else is interested. And I got a good vibe from him. I kind of got on with him as well. So I was like, yeah. And so we've been together ever since. And he sent My Best Friend's Girl out. And again, loads of rejections. And apart from one person who said to come and meet her because she wanted to know if I'd written any more of the book. And I hadn't. I'd written about 20,000 words, but I hadn't written any more. So I went to meet her, and I clicked with her really well, got on with her, and then she offered us a 2-book deal, and that was where that began. And My Best Friend's Girl went on to do amazingly well. There's a bookshop used to be called Ottakers in London, and it was their summer read. And then it was like they did Tube posters. So I was like, oh my God, there's a Tube poster. I came back from Australia for the launch because I was living in Australia at this point. So I'd written the book, I finished the book and I sent it, but I moved to Australia at the same time. So I came back to Australia for the launch, and I was standing there taking pictures of myself in front of these Tube posters because, like, my goodness, there's my name on a poster. And then it did amazingly well. So it was number 36 on the bestseller charts. And I was like, oh my goodness, look at me. I'm on the books, I'm on the bestseller charts. And I remember going to a pub with my friend who's English, but actually lived in Australia as well, but we were in England at the same time. And we went to this bar and I was showing her the number 36 on the book bestseller charts. And the barman looked over and he went, yeah, if you could just knock him off the top. And it was Dan Brown. And I was like, mate, if only. And then like 4 or 5 weeks later, when it was on the Richard and Judy book club, it actually got to number 2 in the bestseller charts. So I was like, wow. I mean, it was just amazing.
I mean, what a journey. And, what I got from that, which I think is important to repeat, is that when you're looking for an agent or a publisher, it's not really about what they can give to you. It's about whether you think that they're a good fit for you. That's what I'm gaining from that conversation. So I quite like the idea of you saying that you got a really nice vibe off of the people that you wanted to work with in terms of your agent and your publisher. So that's fantastic.
I will say a lot of the time, we're so grateful that somebody's interested in your work that you'll go with anybody. And you've got to be really careful about that. I know it's hard. I mean, I know it's hard, but you've just got to hang on for the right person. And when it comes to book deals, they're not offering 6-figure sums. I mean, they never were really, only to certain people. They're not offering lots of money. But if somebody's offering you money, more money than another publisher, really, really look at what is on offer, but also how you feel about that person you're going to be working with, because it really doesn't come down to the money. The money is it becomes 3rd or 4th in the list of the important things. The most important thing is knowing that you can work with this person, because this person after you is the person who's going to be most responsible for where your career goes. And if you get the impression that they are just in it for that book, or just in it because they want to have you on their lists because you fit a quota or something that they have. And I'm not talking about a racial quota necessarily. I'm talking about sometimes they want a working class author, or they think something's missing rather than your book and you and your career. So you've got to be mindful of that. So, look at all those things before you sign on the dotted line. Look at what they're going to do for you, how much they expect you to do when it comes to publishing and publicizing your book. Because sometimes they'll offer you this money and they're expecting you to do their job for them, because it's their job to publicize your book, not yours. Yours is to write the best book you can on time and to the best of your abilities and to engage with the publishing process. Their job is to sell it to the bookshops and to get the word out. Yes, you can help with that. And if the more you want to be involved, the better it is for you. But just remember that somebody offering you a nice package, you've got to look at the details of the package and how it's going to affect you going forward.
That's very good advice, Dorothy, and probably leads us nicely to one of my last questions, which was about the Ice Cream Girls, because I mean, that's still running on Amazon Prime and on ITVB, I think it is. I had a scan last night and that's still showing. How did you feel about one of your books being converted into a film?
Wow. Now this is a very long thing. It was an interesting journey, and I don't really talk about it because it wasn't the most positive experience, but we've all moved on. Again, that was one of those things that's one of the things that I learned about. Look at what you're being offered and look at who you're working with and look at how involved you're going to be. It's very different from my story. It doesn't centralize the Black girl particularly. I don't know, it doesn't get across the nuances of what emotional and physical abuse is about. And that was one of the important things when I was writing The Ice Cream Girls, when I discovered that a lot of abusive relationships begin with emotional abuse and manipulation and isolation. And that was what the book was about. Whereas the TV show focused really heavily on the physical abuse. And for a book that had a response where a lot of people were emailing me and saying, my God, I suddenly realized what was wrong with my life. It wasn't me. It was actually the relationship I was in. And other people saying, I realized I need to get out of this relationship because I can see now where the manipulation and the emotional abuse is happening. So that kind of lost in translation. And speaking of the Ice Cream Girls, the reason why I wrote a sequel to it, that's the first sequel I've ever written, was because we're all more aware of emotional abuse and physical abuse and domestic abuse, basically, and the forms it takes. But although we're aware of it, have we actually dealt with it? And that's why I wrote the sequel, because I wanted to write a story about a person who, a loved one, is now in a situation where they are in an abusive relationship or they're possibly the abuser, and having been abused themselves, how they see it. Because I wanted to tell a story about the bystanders, the people around us, the people around an abusive situation and how they deal with it, whether you believe the person or you try and help them or you try and get them to leave or you get them to stay. So yeah.
So, what's the name of the sequel?
All My Lies Are True.
Fascinating books, and the gap between them was like
10
um,
years.
a good decade, wasn't it?
It was 10 years, yeah. So it was 10 years later. And then I wrote it. I wrote it and finished it in 2019. And so what happened in 2020, and I set it in 2020, and look what happened in 2020. And so I had to write a disclaimer at the front almost saying, all the stuff that they do, just pretend
They're
this
all
is,
socially distanced, yeah, when they do it,
yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
And then the book that I have read, this is the last Dorothy Koomson book that I read, was My Other Husband.
Mm.
Again, kept me on the edge of my seat. I just had to know how this ended. But you mentioned another book that you have coming out soon. When is that likely to be on our shelves?
Every Smiley Fake comes out in February 24, so not too long. And it's coming up it's actually coming up really quickly. Yeah, and it's a story about a woman called Kez who goes back to her car one night after an event where she's been with her friend, and she opens the back door of her car and finds a baby, and she's like, "Oh, there's a baby," and then she realizes whose baby it is, but the mother has completely disappeared. And in the note she leaves, she says, "Please don't look for me." So now Kez is in this dilemma of trying to find whether to try to find the baby's mother or to just look after him like she's been asked to. And guess what she does? She goes looking for her. I mean, it'd be a really short book if she didn't, but yeah, she goes looking for her and then discovers all sorts of things that are going on in the world.
And remind us, what's the name of that book that's coming out?
Every Smile You Fake.
Oh, right. Okay, I'll have to look out for that one. Dorothy, if people wanted to get hold of you or follow you on social media, what are your social media handles?
Mainly Dorothy Koomson or Dorothy Koomson underscore author. I'm on pretty much everything. If I'm not now, I will be, because I have this sort of, I think I have a bit of an issue, a bit of a problem, because every new social media thing comes out, I've got to be on there. So I'm everywhere. So you'll find me somewhere. And I've also got my website, and which is dorothykoomson.co.uk. And I've got my email, which you can email me through my website.
Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like we're going to need a part two. So perhaps when your next book is out, we'll have you back again to give us an update on what's happening. This has been way too short, but thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you.
I wish you all the best with your future endeavors and the new book when it comes out as well. I'm going to be the first to pre-order it when it comes out, and to wish you all the best for the future. As you're aware, this is the last episode of season 6, and given that it's a couple of weeks before Christmas, do you have a message for our listeners?
Yes, have a great Christmas. Make sure you buy all your friends and family and anybody you buy presents for books from your favorite authors, from your favorite podcasters, but also think about maybe buying a book for somebody who won't get a book. There are various charities and organizations who organize book drives to send to people, particularly children who don't get any presents. And sometimes a book is something they can keep with them through the years and through different circumstances in their lives. So, yes, give books for Christmas is what I say.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dorothy Koomson. It is competition time now, and the question is, what are the titles of Dorothy's first and last novel? Contact me on Instagram at Loving the Author with the correct answer by this Friday for your chance to win a copy of her latest book. Sadly, we have come to the end of season 6 of the Author to Author podcast. On behalf of the team, season's greetings, and we wish you all a peaceful new year. Look out for season 7 in spring 2024. Bye for now.